Hi, everyone. Welcome to a DLH Talkback. Today we are with Mark Driscoll, who is a writer on Grey's Anatomy. Mark, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yes. Very excited about your episode that you wrote for Grey's Anatomy called Legacy. And I have a million questions about it. But I wanted to start with just, Grey's Anatomy is in its 18th season. It seems like, it really is sort of the ultimate in medical dramas. It's like the bar that everyone is trying to reach. And so I was just wondering what it's like to be in the writer's room at Grey's.
Well, it's a tricky place because they've done so many stories, and you don't like to repeat yourselves, but doctors certainly repeat themselves. So we'll have a situation where we want to do a lung cancer story, and someone will say, "Oh, we did that last season," or "We did that 2 seasons ago," and it might still serve a new character or help us. So you find yourself doing that delicate dance of saying, "Has it been enough time?" or "Is this a little different?" And so it's challenging. I started on season 11, and at the time I remember thinking, boy, I'm not sure about going on to a show in the last couple of seasons, and here we are going into season 19, and I'm still there, so I'm faced with a whole new set of challenges.
That's so funny. Right. Season 11, you're like, oh, this is winding down.
Exactly. And Christina had just left the show, and we thought, oh, is there a life after Christina? Because that relationship was so central to the, and we were still finding ourselves thinking like, oh, maybe she's calling Christina in Switzerland. It was hard to let go of her, but you have to and find fresh ways to look at things.
Yeah, well, and now, you have characters that are now beloved over the last couple of years. You have an incredible IMDb page. Your resume is a mile long, and you've done, so you've been in a lot of writers' rooms, Suddenly Susan, Hope and Faith, 90210, Scandal. Did you work with Carol Barbie at on Unreal?
No, she had left when I was there. I was only there for the final season, but it was really fun.
Yeah. But none of those are medical dramas.
No, this was the only medical drama, and I came into this in a funny way. I had done Ellen a million years ago, the sitcom, and there was a writer there, I think that I had worked with, and then he had left the show, and then when I was running the show, I brought him back, a guy named Mark Wilding, who's an extremely gifted writer, and he at the time he had when he left comedies, he left before I did and sort of transitioned to dramas, and became very big in Shondaland, and he ran Scandal for years, and he was always trying to get me in. I probably as sort of a payback because I had hired him on Ellen, but we remained great friends over the years, and he kept thinking I would be good in Shondaland, and every time he tried to get me in there, whether it was for Grey's or private practice, some other person would come in at the last minute who had worked on a Shondaland show and was coming back. The pool was so deep and rich that it was hard to get your foot in the door. And then finally, he brought me in for a few episodes of Scandal, and I was replacing somebody who ended up coming back to the show. So I transitioned over to Grey's after that.
So is Shondaland, does it feel like a close-knit group of, it sounds like a close-knit group of people who really enjoy working with each other and are just super talented writers?
Yes, it's very close-knit, and they work very hard. It's an extremely it's a great training ground. People tend not to leave because Shondaland is one of the few places where you can still get a 20 episode order or 22 episode order, which is remarkable in this day and age. So writers tend to come and stay for as long as they can, and but if they leave, they tend to go on to great things because it's a really good training ground.
Yeah, she really does have a knack for creating, both stakes and characters, really putting conflict, but having characters that you just fall in love with and want to know how they're growing and developing as well.
Yes, yes. She used to come into the room. I remember she had this quote. She said, "I like to think of the most interesting, nicest character, and then think of the absolute worst thing that could happen to that person." And we did that a lot on Grey's and on Scandal too. So she was always trying to up the conflict and the drama.
Wow, that's really interesting that that's sort of like a guiding philosophy where you're like, okay, we all love this character. How could we mess with their lives?
Yes, yes. And to this day, we think we're working on an episode and a story in that episode, and we might be thinking like, oh, this maternity case is very interesting, and we really like the character, and we really like the mother. We think she has to die. We just, every once in a while, you just for the sake of the drama we've had too many sweet episodes or happy endings, and we need something a little different here.
Yes. Well, you actually wrote a very sweet episode with Legacy. There was a lot of drama, a lot of conflict, and but when it came to the organ donation component, which is sort of one of the plots, one of the many plots that were happening on the episode, you really told a very beautiful story about a liver transplant. So when we first see the young man, he's a very young man who's in the hospital bed, he's in the hospital waiting, his mother is with him. The doctor, surgeons kind of saying, oh, I can't wait to see this game with you, relating to him. And the mom is like, I don't even want to talk about the future because she's so worried that her son is not going to make it. So you really got very quickly the tension there. But then Dr. Marsh says the 137th day, because you always remember the day that you got your transplant. And just everything changed. Of course, you see that sadness and resignation turn into hope. I'm crying, totally like I'm instantly crying. And I was wondering that it's such a powerful scene, such like a very powerful, I keep saying powerful, but powerful way to bring the audience into this character that they've never met, that why should they care about them? And instantly we care. Was that scene based on something, that you had seen or heard, or an experience of hearing that you've gotten the liver? Or was that just purely made up of what you felt like it would feel like?
It was sort of a combination. I think the initial impulse was because Dr. Marsh is a potential love interest for Meredith in these later seasons, and I think audiences, fans of Meredith, are so devoted to her and are so devoted to the idea of Meredith and Derek that it's always extremely difficult to make someone a potential love interest. They just rebel online, and the fans are just so rabid. And so we were looking for a story that would humanize and give other colors to Nick Marsh, because so far, he's working in Minnesota. He shows up when we need him, but we don't really see what kind of a doctor he is. So we were looking for a story that just showed how he interacts with patients that might be different. And it certainly seemed different that he would be socializing with a patient or saying, let's go to a basketball game. And at first I thought that would be the end of the story, that I set out to tell a story where the thing didn't work out, and the liver, for whatever reason, didn't come through, but we saw how he related to patients and how great he was with patients. And I thought, oh, that would be a nice way to make us all root for him and like him more. And then Christopher Vernoff, who's the showrunner, and Meg Marinas, who runs the day-to-day, said, let's give it a legit happy ending, and let's make the liver come through. And once that happened, things really kind of fell into place, and it became a question of showing that he was interested in the liver from the get-go, that it wasn't just something that you procure from a faceless donor, and the story became richer, I think.
Well, that makes so much sense, because it really did show Dr. Marsh in a very in a beautiful light, right? That he isn't this typical grab and go surgeon, got the liver, I care about my patient, but he was looking out and very interested in the donor family. Oftentimes, you know, I work for the Donate Like Hollywood project is a project of OneLegacy, which is the organ procurement organization in Los Angeles. So when we look at television, oftentimes the donation side of the story is sort of just glossed over, and you know, their medical shows are really interested in the transplant, not in the donation side. You actually had Dr. Marsh talk to the donor family, the grieving donor family, which in most cases, I actually got a few text messages the next day, like, oh my God, I can't believe they showed the transplant surgeon talking to the donor family. And I was like, okay. So I thought, well, you know, I'll watch. And again, I'm instantly in tears because it was such a powerful scene. So, you know, the accuracy of him going to talk to them, I could overlook. You didn't use harvest, you used recover. So I was like super excited about that. But then what made, you know, now I understand that a lot of that was probably out of the motivation of, again, showing Dr. Marsh as this, what kind of doctor he is. Is that the reason you put him with the donor family like that?
Yeah, so that was the pivotal scene for me in the story, that and that got me excited. And we always, once we kind of get an idea of what the story is, we bring in experts. And I think we spoke with Dr. Andrew Klein at Cedars, who's the head of transplant surgery there. And he gave us all kinds of great stuff about the illness and the details and the procurement and the steps. But what we were really trying to get him to say was, does it ever happen? Does it ever happen that the doctor talks to the donor family? And he said, well, I don't think it really does. And we kept pushing him. Could there be a situation if it's a small hospital? And then he actually came around to say, well, it's not outside the realm of possibility that the donor family would be at the hospital, and that we certainly are very visible in our particular scrubs with our cooler. It's no secret what we're there for. So it's possible that there could be an interaction. And once he gave that okay, we were able to do that scene. And that's why I wanted to add the kind of typical reaction of another surgeon saying, and not a bad guy or anything, just saying like, oh, just as a heads up, there's a grieving family out there, just to give them wide berth for their own privacy and for why upset them, and to show that Dr. Marsh is a different type of doctor, that he saw the potential awful, difficult conversation and walked right towards it. And I thought, oh, what a great way to highlight the idea that you're not just getting something from a factory, it's coming from a human being with a story and a life and dreams and family members he's left behind. So we really wanted to highlight that, and it gave the story a lot of life.
Yeah, a lot of depth, just a lot of depth, you know. And I will say the way that you handled it as well, it wasn't like Dr. March was approaching the family about donation. He wasn't the one asking about donation. It was clear that this is something that is uncommon. He did it with so much respect. He did it in order to really find out, to ask questions about, you know, the family, to know about them, the loved one who had passed, to get his name, to really be invested in their world. He wasn't there, you know, prying or bringing in any kind of like, it wasn't his world. He like set his ego aside, you know?
Yes, exactly. And I love the idea that that he passed that lesson on to the person in the OR with him when he's doing the transplant, and he's asking about not only about the recipient, but about the donor. And of course, the doctor has no idea what his name is or anything. And Nick tells him a little bit about that and plays the aria that he sang and everything. That was right. Sweet.
Yes. And again, that scene had me in complete tears. I mean, it was funny because there was this other storyline with the very high tech, you know, surgery that was going to go down in history and all of that kind of stuff. And those scenes came and went, and they were there was full of tension and, conflict and all of that kind of stuff. But then every time it delved back into the organ donation and transplant storyline, I was just instantly in tears again, because there was so much heart, woven into that storyline. I did want to, it's interesting. It's very clear that you got expert consultation, because a lot of people don't know or don't realize that all of the transplant teams fly or converge on the donor hospital. And so you have that line of, you have the heart folks, the lung folks, the liver folks, the kidney, pancreas, you've got everyone sort of staged. So you showed that both in the hallway scene where you saw that everyone was staged, and then in the montage where the recovery was happening, you saw how one transplant team was there and then went, and then it was Dr. Marsh's turn to kind of step up to plate in order to recover that liver. So was that something that Dr. Klein had told you and you just thought was really fascinating and wanted to weave into this storyline there?
Well, I read about the process and how sometimes the abdominal team will go in and look and see, okay, well, the liver looks good, it makes sense, and then they'll step back, and then the cardio team does the same thing for the heart and the lungs, and then the procurement, once it starts to happen, they don't tend to leave the OR. They're all scrubbed and they're ready. So I just wanted to get them out into a hallway to provide that interaction, and he signed off on that. But it's certainly not usual, but it's a small hospital, and we thought we could stretch the reality a little bit to have that exchange possible.
Well, that's what you guys do. I love when I'm doing expert consultations, what you just said, but could it happen? Could it ever happen? Would it ever be possible? And then, you've got Dr. Klein going, well, I mean, yes, like feasibly he would know where the family was and he could walk in. Yes, yeah. Feasibly they could all be sitting in, a hallway.
And we have doctors on the writing staff too, and they're kind of the first line of defense and keeping the integrity of the show, because the writers are looking at it purely from a dramatic standpoint. They're like, oh, but can't she help out in the surgery? And they'll be very patient. They're like, no, she's a pediatric surgeon. She's not helping out with a transplant. It can't happen. And we sort of like sulk for a little bit and then try to find a compromise. But that's the constant battle on the show of keeping it as realistic as we can, and yet making it interesting and dramatic.
Right, and getting where you want to go, which is, now that you've explained, like this episode was really to highlight what kind of Dr. Marsh is, so that we're all like, okay, he can date Meredith.
Exactly.
Okay, we approve. It was like getting the audience's approval as like the parents or the best friends of Meredith and saying, okay, we like this guy. Right. So you talked a little bit about that scene where Dr. Marsh asks the colleague, the donor's name, and he doesn't know. And he says this incredible line. He just says, it's not just an organ, is it? It's someone's life, it's someone's brother, someone's child. It's the greatest gift a human being can give another being. If you want to be a great transplant surgeon, you can't forget that. You can't forget the person who gave the gifts. I'm tearing up just like rereading your words. Obviously, again, I'm in complete tears in that scene once more. I mean, I do this for a living, and every scene that had a donation point in it had me just emotional, because it felt so so real and so celebratory of the donor and the gift. So talk about that scene and that kind of speech that he gives, because it's a greatest gift a human being can give to another human being. We say that in organ donation all the time, but where does that come from for you?
I just think I grew up. My father had a kidney transplant. He was on
Wow.
dialysis for a million years, and this is way or in the early days of dialysis in Massachusetts, which is at the forefront of of it. And we had a one of those early dialysis machines at home, which looked like an early IBM computer. It was massive, and my mother learned to operate it. She was not a nurse, had no medical background, and my father was on dialysis at home for I want to say 10 or 15 years, and then his sister gave her kidney, and his sister was a nun. And back in the days when they still wore habits, and I remember coming from my high school was right around the corner from Peterbent Brigham in Boston, and walking over from school on the day of the transplant, and there were just in the waiting rooms flocks of nuns from my aunt's convent, and they were all there, and it was such an amazing sight and scene that I always remembered it. And I thought, like, oh, it's so cool to think of all these people are here for the donor, and the donor really was featured, and I that always stuck with me. And I thought, like, oh, we should always find a way to highlight the donor, even if the poor donor died in a car accident or something. And then cut 2 years later, when I was doing Ellen, one of my dearest friends and a great writer, this guy Dave Foubat, was waiting had cystic fibrosis, and was really living on borrowed time, and suddenly got a double lung transplant from again a car accident, and I just remember thinking, like, oh, that's an amazing thing to be a donor. And I was thinking, when we put this scene in the show, if a bunch more kids like thought when they get their license, that I'm going to make sure I'm a donor, it would be a great thing. It would be a fantastic thing. It's still disheartening when you see how the numbers, they're rising, but there's still the percentage of people who are donors is still low, and we want to always boost it.
Awesome. Well, I will tell you, we do a lot of high school presentations all around the country. All of the organ procurement organizations work in high schools. Obviously, high schools is a really important place for us because they're about to get their driver's license. And, in every state, checking yes is linked to your driver's license, mostly because that's just, we get the largest pool of people doing that thing. And so asking them to make that decision there. And a lot of high school kids are Grey's Anatomy fans. I mean, there's a lot of early days Grey's that have some iffy things that happen, and people, the kids, because they're streaming them, they're binge watching all 18 seasons, and so they will bring things up in classroom with us. Well, what about, or I saw, that kind of thing. So I would say that of all the shows, Grey's Anatomy probably has the biggest impact on young people when it comes to organ donation of any show.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear.
Yeah. Are you a donor? Obviously,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, I'm a potential donor, and I sometimes I get sad as I get older. I ask the doctors in the room, does anybody still want my eyes? Does anybody still want my liver? But it still has some
yes.
shelf life.
The answer is yes. The oldest donor was a woman in her 90s,
which is amazing. Yes.
So, and she was a tissue donor. But yes. As long, that is one of the reasons to take good care of our own organs too,
Sure.
Right? Give us life and then be able to pass it on to others. Well, it was a powerful scene. And then just when I thought, oh my God, I'm crying, I'm like, this is amazing, then there's the final scene where the young man who's the liver recipient is doing well. Dr. Marsh is there in the room. The mom is there again. Completely different situation. She's no longer, worried that her son is going to die. She's now hopeful at this next chance at life. And she says, how do I thank the people who lost their son today? And now I'm in tears again. Now I'm crying. I'm like, just thinking about it, it's bringing me to tears. You left the question open. That Dr. Marsh, and I think rightly so, didn't try to tell her how to do that, because how do you tell someone how to do that? But why, what was the decision about just leaving it on that question?
I think that was Meg Marinas who wrote that line, who put that line in, which I loved, and I think the hope is that the recipient will think about that donation and live his best life. And it seemed a little pat to try to answer it in that, just bringing it up kept the memory of the donor alive, and the importance of the graded gift. So I didn't feel like we had to answer it, but I was glad that we posed the question.
Yeah, and I think if there was an answer for Dr. Marsh, it would be, something like simply live every day fully, right? Like, how do you thank someone who lost their son? You do the best you can with the gift. You
Yes.
take care of it, and you honor the legacy of the donor. So the name of the episode was also called Legacy, which is very apropos to the donation community. Again, Donate Life Hollywood is a project of OneLegacy. There's another OPO called Our Legacy. A lot of OPOs are named Gift or Hope or Life or Legacy. Like, that's our general wheelhouse. So I was so excited about the name of the episode too, because I think ending on that question, how do I thank the people who lost their son today? It's showing that legacy, that now this young man, this liver recipient, is the legacy of this gift. But then you had this other whole storyline about this experimental surgery that really was about leaving a legacy as well, leaving a medical legacy. So where did you decide on the name of the episode?
Well, I think the name actually came from another story, from the Richard Weber story of he's worried about his reputation and his own legacy as a teacher, and he's he's had this experience with Levi, who lost a patient, and he feels responsible because he put him in that position. So I think Richard considers himself almost a teacher before a surgeon, or it's at least as important. So we thought that we're trying to preserve and define his legacy. So that's where the story came. That's where the title came from, and then it just seemed to fit so well with the groundbreaking Parkinson's surgery that Meredith is doing, and the organ donation. The organ donation, I think, fell into the episode, I want to say, in its final form, probably last, and I was happiest with it. It was my favorite part of the episode. So you never know how these things are going to pan out.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I didn't even think of legacy in terms of that other plot that was happening. Yeah, all of the storylines that were woven together had to do with that, leaving your legacy. What is your legacy? Yeah, it's interesting how it all fell together. But for us in the organ donation world, I don't think there could be a better title of an episode when it comes to organ donation, and specifically how you wrote it, because it just was all about legacy.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's really nice.
Yeah, yeah. Have you met, you've met a living donor, obviously, and then you've had another recipients and recipient friends. So you've been personally touched by donation. Have you ever met donor families? Because how you captured, that the essence of the donor family, obviously a family who's grieving, but a family who is also wanting to celebrate the legacy of their brother and son. Have you ever met a donor family member?
No, I've known people who have donated, but I've never specifically sat down with a family like that. So I just thought it would be great to have a sibling, and also a sibling who regrets not spending appreciating the person who's gone seemed very natural and true to life.
Yeah, that sibling grief is a very different thing from, losing a child, obviously very difficult, but the sibling grief is a real thing. And yeah, you very beautifully kind of expressed that and had Dr. Marsh right there kind of, comforting the family. Again, not just there to take, not just there to talk about his patient, but to let the family know, like, it's okay that you have this regret that you told your kid brother to shut up when he was singing too loud when your friends were over.
Yes.
That,
Yes.
that's not, don't worry about that now, kind of thing.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I think medicine is so, especially surgery, is so it's so quick and fast, and they have a job to do. And I remember once I have a son who had a cleft palate surgery, and he was very, very young, and they let me carry him at UCLA. They let me carry him into the OR, which was an incredible thing. And I brought him in and laid him down, and as they were just about to put the anesthesia on him, they said, "Okay, Dad, you can step back now." And as I did, it was like clang, clang, boom. All these machinery went into place, and I thought, "Oh my God, it's so fast." But I'll forever be grateful that they let me have this walk in. And I felt like in that scene, when he's letting them each say something about him, I'm sure in his mind there's a clock ticking that I've got to get in there and procure the organ, and every second counts. But it was nice to just let them have that moment. It felt like a very human thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that they sometimes do also is have something that the parents or the wife or something has written, and when they're all in the OR, will read it out and take just a moment of silence before they start the procurement, to really presence all of the transplant surgeons on that this is a person, this is a human, this is a loved one. And and that because of because of either the checkbox or the yes from the family, this yes is now bringing a second life to all of their patients. So having that kind of just that tenderness within, and feeling an emotion and humanization amongst all of the surgery that happened. I want to say, though, you got another piece where I'm wondering if Dr. Klein mentioned this, where he slides the slush into the body cavity prior to like the actual recovery of the liver. Was that a technical detail?
That was a technical detail. I guess there are a few different ways of doing it, but that was one that he mentioned that seemed visual and interesting.
That is visual and interesting. I mean, I noticed it too, and I was like, "Oh, I think we work with that slush manufacturer."
Oh, that's so funny. And in fact, when he was describing who would be on each procurement team, the reality was just a bigger crowd than we would be able to show. And but it's very impressive how many people are involved, and how many things have to go right. It's a remarkable process,
Yes.
And anytime you can show it. And of course, I think it's so important to tell good donation stories. You never want to discourage anyone from being signing up for it, because it's an amazing thing.
And people do get scared by what they see on television. One of the biggest myths and fears that people have is that they won't work as hard to save me if I have the donor dot, because people know there's a shortage of organs, and they know that rich people get away with murder and get away with anything, right? In the United States. And so there's a feeling that their lives are not as important. as maybe somebody who's rich and famous who's waiting for an organ. And that does come from Hollywood, one of, I mean, our cause has a lot of conflict already built in. And one of the conflicts is that there is a shortage. And so, that kind of who lives, who dies element of it. But the way that you did it was, it was so obvious that the donor family was, had been treated well, that, you didn't say it, but that everything had been done to save this donor's life, that this was the decision, and now they were just there to celebrate their son and help others if they can. So it was a very subtle, you didn't have to debunk any myths and misconceptions, but by just showing kind of the way that the donor family was reacting to the whole thing, it felt very natural, and I think is comforting for people.
Yes. Oh, good. Yes, I'm sure we've told stories in the past where, and they're always fascinating stories to me, where half the family is on board with the donation, and this is not something that was prearranged, but and then there's a sibling who's against it for whatever reason, and those are heartbreaking and dramatic, and but you always want to root for the best outcome if you're putting it on TV.
Yeah, and that is conflict. That's a real life conflict. I mean, Hollywood creates all kinds of conflict, and I'm like, oh, just we'll tell you about some of the real conflict, but that can be very difficult, especially if someone's registered. If they've already registered and then the mom is like, oh, hell no, you're not doing this.
Oh, wow.
Then the conflict of how do you honor someone's wishes who's
Sure.
already said yes, and that's legally binding. And then you have a next of kin who is vehemently opposed to it. And that's just, how we deal with it is just usually people are saying no because they don't understand brain death. They don't understand the process. And you just kind of pull them around and help them understand what's going on.
Right.
But it's real conflict that really does happen. So well, it was a lovely episode. It was just really beautifully done. So I want to thank you for writing it, for going to Dr. Klein and getting kind of the inside scoop on that, for pushing the envelope a little bit on what really happens, but in order to create a very tender moment and really give a voice and a face and an emotion to the family, the donor family, and not just have a transplant storyline, but have a donation and transplant storyline.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much. I was so thrilled, and we cast beautiful actors. They were just amazing in that scene, and everybody seemed to get the scene and play it perfectly. So I was thrilled, and you wish you could do that all the time, to see that the other side and see that family. But they were fantastic. Thank you.
They did a great job. So I'm going to see you again at the DLH Inspire Awards. We're going to have it in August, so I'll send you all the details, and you will be getting a DLH Inspire award for this episode. It's probably, I have a handful of favorite episodes, and this is top 5 for me of all time, really, in any of the episodes ever created. And there's a lot of organ donation episodes.
Sure.
And this one just was just so beautifully crafted. So thank you again for taking on our cause and really taking the time and care with it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for talking to us today. And I will see you in August at the Inspire Awards.
Terrific. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye now.